Hi everyone, welcome to Help Nobody Told Me. My partner Jasmine Shapiro and myself Shannon Johnson Shannon and Jasmine.
Some people do refer to us as
Jasmine,
Shannon or
something like that. So we're here today talking to Jorie Houlihan, and we are going to talk about a very interesting subject today, and that is ADHD, especially in women diagnosed as an adult later in life. So Jorie is here today. You've been through this.
Yes.
And you are now a life coach, and you coach women through ADHD and a lot of things like that. Tell us a little bit about how you came to your diagnosis and got involved in this.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're so glad to have you.
Thanks. The first time I brought up ADHD with a doctor, I don't know if I even called it that, but I talked to a doctor about focus issues, basically. I was 19 and I was dismissed. And I tried again over the years, and I was always kind of out of hand dismissed. And I finally just gave up, and I thought, okay, I guess I just don't adult well. And then I got into my
Do any of us adult well? I don't know.
Yeah, well, sometimes. But then I went to, when I was in my early 40s, I really started to get depressed because I was just looking at like all these people in my life who I had always thought were my peers academically and otherwise, just like flying right by me. Like they had these great careers and they had these relationships and whatever. And I have a great marriage and I have 2 great kids, but I just felt like something wasn't right. And I just thought, is this really all I'm capable of? I just always thought I would do so much more with my life. And so I was getting really depressed. And then when COVID happened, I had actually taken this course, one of the many courses I took trying to fix what I now know was ADHD. And one of the main goals that I had decided on that I was going to work on was self-discipline. I'm like, everything I'm unhappy with in my life is because I don't have self-discipline. I am going to master self-discipline. And as I started to research it, I'm like, I already know all of this. Why can't I do this? And around that time, TikTok became a big thing, and I ended up on there and almost immediately ended up in ADHD TikTok. And that's when I started to go, because it wasn't the obvious, forgetfulness stuff. It was that out of sight, out of mind is a big part of ADHD, and that includes people. Like, I will literally forget people exist. And I just thought, okay, this has got to be what this is. But I'm like, I'm not self-diagnosing myself from TikTok videos. And finally, I'm in a mastermind with 2 women, and one of the women, I jokingly said in one of our sessions, oh, sorry, I think I have ADHD, kind of joking. And she actually kind of stopped me, and she's like, actually, I think you do. And
really?
Yeah. And she goes, and I think that's why you struggle so much, and I think you're always going to flounder until you get this figured out. And it changed my life, her saying that. Because it turns out she had ADHD. She had also been diagnosed late, and she was just watching me drown, and she knew exactly what was going on. But because it was COVID, you couldn't really get in anywhere, so I had to do it through an online thing. But it got the ball rolling, and
You mentioned depression, so is that a big sign?
So anxiety and depression are often side effects of untreated ADHD. Okay. Because you will spend like the whole day trying to get yourself to do the thing, whatever that thing is, and you can't do it, and you don't understand why you can't get yourself to do it. And so you're really anxious because you're like, I got to do the thing. And then if you don't do it, then you're depressed because you're like, oh my God, I'm such a loser. I'm so lazy, da-da-da. And it's none of that. It's executive dysfunction all over the place, and which is a big part of ADHD. And women historically have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression first. And they'll tell you like, and I never really thought the meds did much, but I didn't know. And then when they finally do get diagnosed with ADHD and they're put on the right medication or just different treatment in general, they find that they start flourishing. And so, but there are still, unfortunately, a lot of medical professionals that still don't really understand that ADHD does impact women and girls, and it isn't just bouncing off the walls and and that kind of thing. It looks very different in girls than it does with boys and men. And so my hope is that, especially with so many women now being diagnosed with it, they're going to start doing better studies, and I think there's just going to be better education out there for everybody, not just the medical community.
So what are some other symptoms?
So it can be really subtle. So, for example, I mentioned out of sight, out of mind. So we moved all of the vegetables out of the vegetable drawer in our refrigerator and put it on the center shelf of the refrigerator because I don't think to look in that drawer. I always open this and I'm like, oh, I don't see what I want, and I close the door and then everything goes bad, right? And so
we should probably all do that.
Right?
I was thinking, like,
should probably put the junk in the drawers that we're not supposed to eat.
Yeah, we put the condiments down in there. We don't have a door that has like the tray, so we just put everything there. But it also, like I said, it also includes people. So like it's weird, we don't miss people, but until somebody mentions maybe somebody that I haven't seen in a while, and then I'll go, oh my gosh, I haven't seen them in forever, and then I'll miss them, and I'll be like, oh, I should reach out. But that obviously impacts relationships because there are a lot of people in my life that I lost touch with simply because they weren't in front of me all the time, and I kind of forgot about them. And then you have all this embarrassment because it's been so long that you feel embarrassed then to reach out. And so that is one of them. Being super talkative. I'm sure you've noticed that I'm a little talkative, so that could be a sign. Interrupting people because we're afraid we're going to forget what we're going to say. And we also have issues with impulse control, so sometimes it comes out before we have a chance to keep it from coming out. It can be, especially with girls who tend to present with the inattentive presentation, it can be, you're disorganized, you're messy, but as girls is written off as character flaws. She's so messy, she's so disorganized, she's so flighty. And they don't realize that these kids are really struggling. Like they have the messy desk and the messy backpack, and the room's always a mess and that kind of thing because they get overwhelmed by it, and they struggle with the executive functioning skills to keep it organized in the first place. And those are also some more subtle signs of it.
Wow. So why are women being diagnosed later in life, do you think?
So I think COVID started the avalanche really because you had these women who were keeping it together enough, right? And then all of a sudden they're home with their kids and working from this. And I mean, for everybody that was stressful, but if you have terrible executive functioning skills and you have trouble keeping yourself organized, and now you're trying, like I was trying to help my son with accelerated math, and I was a theater major, like what, And I think so many women just sort of hit this point where it's just like something isn't right. And then when and TikTok, I think, did actually start to make it more mainstream, so people started to feel seen and to go, wait, this is me. Like I completely feel this, and so more women started going in and getting assessed, and there's a lot of, like, I have a Facebook community, and there's like 17,000 people in there, and it's crazy. These women they're just looking for people who get them, because we have spent our entire life feeling different and not understanding why. And so to go, oh, there's actually something behind that, and I'm not the only one who does these things. Like, I'm not the only one who could listen to the same song over and over again, like 500 times in a week, because we're just sucking all the dopamine out of the song, right? And whereas neurotypical people apparently don't do that. I didn't know that. So I think for these women, they're finding a community and a home when they didn't have that before. And so, like I had mentioned to you guys earlier, the key is making sure that when you are getting assessed, that it's with a doctor that does understand what it looks like in women, because it is different.
You said executive functioning, and I know we hear that term thrown around a lot. For our listeners, explain exactly what you mean when you say executive functioning.
Yeah, so executive functioning are things that we do on a day-to-day basis to get us through our day. So it's time management, prioritization, organization, self-awareness, working memory, verbal and nonverbal working memory. So, and impulse control. So, that part of our brain does not fire properly. And so for a lot of us, it just doesn't quite work. So for example, prioritizing is a challenge because neurotypical people, they'll put the most important thing like at the top of the list, and then the next most important thing will go under that, and then the next most important thing will go under that, etc. But for us, everything feels the same weight. So we prioritize horizontally. And so it's just like, and we want to do everything in that day, which you can't do most of the time. And so trying to figure out like, all right, well, what's the most important thing you have to do today? And your brain's saying, but they're all important. I have to get them all done. It makes day-to-day things challenging because you have to prioritize every single day of your life. So that makes it a bit of a challenge.
So when you're coaching someone with ADHD, what does that look like?
So when people come to me, they apply actually with me first. They don't just sign up and start doing it. We actually have a conversation first. And every person is different and everybody's ADHD is different. So I really have to customize it for what they are wanting to get out of it, what their biggest struggles are. Almost every person, I start off though with them tracking their time because we have something called time blindness. So we don't feel time passing very well, and we can't estimate how long things will take to do, and we also have trouble seeing the future. And so when it is a task that they enjoy doing or are indifferent to, they'll often underestimate how long it will take to do by about 50%. So they'll be like, oh yeah, that'll take me an hour, and it will take them 2. And they do this with like everything, so then they're behind before they even get started. And then for tasks that they don't want to do, they tend to overestimate how long they think it will take by almost 3 times.
Wow.
Just based on working with my clients, that's been the average.
Wow.
So it's like, how long do you think it'll take to unload the dishwasher? I had a client who she could not get herself to do the dishwasher. And meanwhile, she has dishes like accumulating in the sink. She lived by herself. She just could not get herself to do it. And I said, okay, it's now your homework. And I want you to time how long it takes you. And she did take her homework seriously. So she did it. And when she came in, I said, so? And she's like, I feel silly. And I said, well, how long did it take? She goes, to both unload and reload, it took 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And she goes, it wouldn't have taken that long if I hadn't waited so long because I just had all these dishes then,
I was going to say, that sounds like my husband. Like, if tasks he doesn't want to do take 3 times as long.
Okay, we may have to get Erin tested because this has come up a few times now.
So I work with them based on what their individual wants are. Some people want me to help them create structure. And it goes beyond just creating structure in their life. They also need the accountability to stick with that structure. And so people with ADHD actually need extra accountability. And so a lot of my clients, they may have started off with specific things in mind, but they stay with me because they like that accountability and they know that I get them. And they know that I live this myself. And so this, I always say this is a judgment-free zone. There is no shaming in anything. And I can't tell you how many women have said at some point, especially early on, how refreshing it is to talk about this and not feel shamed for it. And, that's what I want for all of them. Because when I think of how much potential's been left on the table for women who haven't been diagnosed,
For sure.
I want them to feel empowered, and that's the main thing I'm focusing on.
Well, and especially as women, we tend to manage the household, and that even in 2024, that's still an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And so if struggling with that and you feel like you're failing, then your self-confidence and everything starts to really sit on that.
Right.
Hence the depression, the anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So it just all magnifies all of that.
Yeah, and then, the divorce rate for people with ADHD is very high, in part because of that. And if you have a spouse that doesn't have it and they still think it's not a real thing or they don't really want to learn about it, it will be incredibly challenging to stay in that relationship. And also, ADHD is very heritable. So if one parent has it, almost always, at least one of the kids has it. I heard somebody joking that, when they took their kid in, the doctor was like, all right, so which one of the parents has it? Because it's like almost assumed. Yeah. And so then you're trying to manage ADHD kids, which is a whole other ballgame because their frontal lobe isn't fully developed yet, and that's where a lot of our challenges are to begin with. And they say that kids with untreated or undertreated ADHD hear over 20,000 more negative comments than their neurotypical peers by the age of 12.
Wow, I believe that.
And it isn't like necessarily like abusive. It's simply sometimes just stop it. I said stop. Listen.
Don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah. And another part of ADHD that people don't realize is a big part of it is emotional dysregulation. And so we really struggle to regulate. We struggle to regulate our emotions. And actually, most of ADHD is actually about a struggle to self-regulate. So most people think that it's a deficit of attention because it's in the name, and by all accounts, it's a really poorly misnamed condition. Our brain actually wants to pay attention to everything. And so we can't always regulate where that attention goes. And so, and with the emotional dysregulation, I've said many times that I wish I'd been diagnosed sooner, not so much for my own sake, but for my kids. Because when they were young, I was very dysregulated all the time, and I yelled a lot, and I have so much regret about that. And I've also, though, had conversations with my kids since my diagnosis and learning these things to kind of explain, and I think that actually did go a long way with them. But there are so many moms out there who just think they're just a really terrible mom, when it's just they are very dysregulated and they don't know that. They don't know why.
Right. But for them, having seen you overcome that challenge,
Mm-hmm.
then they see you as a winner, as someone who has conquered something like that in their life. And that's
Right.
a really powerful thing
Yes.
for your children to see.
Yeah. I mean, and I still have my days, to be honest.
But you're human.
Yes, I am human. And now, though, I find that when I do yell at them, it's because I've asked them to do something like 18 times and they didn't listen. So I feel I am justified now.
Right.
And, but yeah, so that's part of it as well.
Well, you were sharing before we started the podcast recording just about how you were telling your husband you wanted to get diagnosed, and he didn't even notice anything and was kind of surprised, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was sort of like, you don't have that. And I was like, guess what? And then as he was starting to learn and as I was starting to educate, he was starting to go, oh, that's ADHD? Oh, that's ADHD too, huh? And like I mentioned when we were talking, like sometimes it's little weird things like leaving cabinet doors and drawers open. And I had never thought about it, and it used to drive him crazy. And I was like, look, I have so much bandwidth in a day. Is this what you want me spending it on? Because
Right.
Like to me, it's not a big deal because now I know what's in the cabinet because it's already open. It's like one less step for me,
Right.
But
we think about like when we were in elementary school and boys that were, they called them hyper.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the ones with ADHD. So, bringing up some symptoms like leaving cabinet doors open, like you wouldn't think of that.
Right. And the, as I mentioned earlier, like boys' symptoms tend to be very outward and disruptive, and that's why they're caught so early. Whereas with girls, it's much more inward and destructive because they do turn it inward and they do, their self-talk is horrifying. I'm speaking from myself, like, we are our own worst bullies. And I think women in general, unfortunately, we have that as a thing, but it's compounded by the ADHD because we see people handling what they think are like easy things and we're struggling with them. But then like in an emergency, we are like the people to call
Right.
because the emergency kicks in the adrenaline, which is basically like a shot of a stimulant, and we're like, all right, you're handling this, I got that, da-da-da, and we handle it. And so people are like, I don't understand how you can handle this complicated thing,
Right.
but you can't fold the laundry. And I'm like, I wish I knew, but yeah, laundry is my nemesis.
And what about social media? Because it could be very distracting.
Yes. So I have a love-hate relationship with social media. I have a large following on social media, and it has helped with my business, so that's the love part of it.
Right.
But I also know they're just landmines. Like, you will be on there forever, and that's part of where that time blindness comes in too, because you'll be on and you'll think you'll be on for like 5 minutes, and you look up and you're like, oh my God, it's been 2 hours. And
It's like you need to set a timer.
I am a big fan of timers, but you have to know how to work them properly, because we don't like being told what to do. I mean, nobody does, but we really take it to a different level. And so for example, if we were planning on doing something, maybe even something we enjoyed, but if somebody tells us to do it before we get around to doing it, our brain is just like, well, we're not doing it now. And I was always just told I was very stubborn, which is true, but that was part of it. And so timers and reminders are sort of, in a sense, telling us what to do. And so we tend to hear them and then ignore them, or we tune them out. And so you have to kind of learn how to work with them in a way that is going to work for your brain. And that's where the coaching comes in, because we kind of play around with different things to work with them. And we have backup plans, because it'll work for a while and then it doesn't. And so you need to find an alternative, and then maybe you can go back to the original, and you just kind of, it's helping them kind of break through rigid thinking and perfectionism with all or nothing thinking. It is challenging, but it is something that when they can start to become more flexible with it and go, okay, it's okay if I don't always get this right. It's okay. We always feel like we have something to prove, and helping them understand that, like, you're fine on your own. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. It's challenging, but you can do it. So
when somebody starts coaching with you,
Mm-hmm.
do you meet with them once a week, or do they check in with you? Like, how does it even start?
So we have, like I said, we have sort of an initial phone call to even see if it's going to be a good fit, and at that point I learn, some things about them. At that point, I actually do it based on time versus sessions. So they'll pay for like 2 or 3 hours per month. And the first session is always an hour, because I do an intake and we get into a lot more of the nitty gritty. But not everybody can sit for an hour when you have ADHD. So that's why I do it by time. So if they want to break that hour up into maybe 2 30-minute sessions a week, they can do that. So some people will do, like, if they do 2 hours, they'll do like 2 45-minute sessions and a 30-minute session, that kind of thing. And we just we talk about it the first session. What are they comfortable with? I'm really flexible with it. So I'm like, we can make this work for however it's going to work for you and your schedule. And again, we just start talking about what's important to them. What are they really wanting to get out of it? A lot of them are still, even though they're approaching me for coaching, they're still working on their acceptance that they have it. It's really hard to admit you have it, because you can't outgrow it. It's with you for the rest of your life. And it's hard to admit that we struggle with what other people think are just basic things. But when they work with me, because they know I get it, because they know I live it, I think helps them to relax into it a little bit more. And I always tell them, if you didn't do your homework, don't skip the session. Don't, cancel on me. I said, because we want to talk about that, because there's something that happened there, and let's talk about what it is. And I'm always telling them to look at, like, if they're procrastinating on something, I'll be like, okay, I want you to come from the lens of curiosity, not judgment. Be curious. All right, I'm clearly feeling resistance to doing this thing. What's going on? Does this feel too big? Do I think it's going to take too much time? Is it just really boring and there's no dopamine in it? Like, let's talk about what it is. And that helps them then figure out, okay, it feels too big. I just need to break this down a little bit so it feels more manageable. And that's how we kind of do it. So it's about a lot of teaching them how to break things down, so the overwhelm isn't so big, because overwhelm is a big part of ADHD.
And you mentioned dopamine twice now.
Yeah.
I was going to the same place.
Yeah.
So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that it's sort of like the reward chemical of the brain. It's what gives you that sense of accomplishment and what motivates you to do things. And we have a deficit of it. And sometimes it is because our brains just don't make enough, our bodies don't make enough dopamine. In other cases, it can be that maybe there are too many receptors in one part of the brain, so it sucks the dopamine in too quickly, so it doesn't have a chance to mature. And so the dopamine is the thing that gets you to do the thing. And then it is converted into norepinephrine also known as noradrenaline, and that's what fires the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe, there's a couple of different things that I'll talk about here. So the first one is the prefrontal cortex, which I kind of already touched on, which is where there's a lot of executive functioning held. So if you don't have enough dopamine, how well do you think that's going to, to convert into the norepinephrine? How well do you think your frontal lobe's firing? Probably not so well. So the prefrontal cortex isn't working as well, so therefore your executive functioning isn't going to be working as well. But the frontal lobe also works as a filter. And so, we're inundated with information all day long, right? And we don't need to know 99% of it on a conscious level. And when the frontal lobe is working properly, it puts it in the subconscious, what we don't need to know. And what does get through, the rest of the brain says, oh, that got through, it must be important, we need to pay attention to it. Well, if your frontal lobe's not firing very well, you're going to have a lot more information coming through, and the rest of the brain is still saying, oh, that got through, it must be important, we need to pay attention to it. And so that's why an example for me was like when I was in school, whenever we took tests, my brain could not tune out the ticking of the clock, no matter how much I tried. And it would be such a big distraction for me, right? And so it can be little things like that, but our brain is just always paying attention to what's in front of it because there's just much more information getting through. But it's one of the reasons we do get easily distracted and have, shiny object syndrome and all that stuff. So the dopamine plays a big role.
Okay. Makes sense.
It does make sense.
I feel like you need like a diagram to
Right.
break all that down, a visual.
Yeah.
So those of us who don't have ADHD, how can we support our friends?
So if somebody comes to you and says that they think they have it, a lot of times people go into this, oh, you don't have it, you're fine. Or, oh, well, doesn't everybody have a little ADHD? Which drives me crazy. Don't do that. Just say, you know what, if you think you should get assessed. Show them that you're being supportive and ask them how you can help them. If for example, like your friend has ADHD and they tend to disappear for a while, it may be because they have forgotten about you, and it's not because they don't love you, but they have the out of sight, out of mind, so maybe reach out to them a little more often. I now have like a list of people that I reach out to, but I have to remember who's supposed to be on the list. I'm starting a master list now, so I remember everybody because I will forget. But it's mostly just being there and just and listening without judgment, because they have been judged their whole life. We have been called lazy and stupid and everything in between. And so when they feel that they're in a safe place to be themselves, because what I really want for them is to be authentic. I want them to feel like they can be their weird, quirky self and feel empowered by that. And so when so if you are the loved one of one of those people, just let them be them. They'll start to unmask as they start to accept their diagnosis and things that they've been holding in and whatever, because they thought, oh, people will think this is weird. They start to unconsciously start to let some of that stuff go.
Is that how you get the trust from your clients? Because you obviously are living it, so
Yeah.
they feel you can relate.
Yes, yeah, and I often hear, I feel like my ADHD got worse after I got diagnosed, and I'm like, no, you're just much more aware of it's showing up, and you're also unconsciously masking, because now that you got that diagnosis, it's very validating, and so then you kind of are just sort of like, oh, I don't need to hold this in. I know this is a real thing, right? And but they are like, but I feel like it's worse. I'm like, no. And then the other thing in terms of how people can support, often when somebody's first diagnosed, they will, they'll be accused of blaming everything on their ADHD. But what they're not really blaming it, they're naming it. They're going, oh, this is ADHD. Oh, this is ADHD. So if you have someone in your life who's doing that, just be like, oh, did you just realize that's part of your ADHD? Just go with it. Don't be like, oh, you're blaming everything on it. I tell my clients, I tell my kids, and I tell myself regularly, ADHD is an explanation. It's not an excuse. You still have to figure out how to make it work. But in the beginning, like I said, they're just naming it. They're going, I had no idea this. It impacts money. It impacts health. It impacts so many. I mean, I could talk about this for hours. So,
what about coworkers? If you have a coworker that has some ADHD characteristics that maybe disrupt the flow
Are you
of
trying to tell me something?
things like I mean, how do you handle those situations?
So it's very interesting with coworkers. So a lot of people with ADHD also have, like, we don't always recognize social cues very well. And so we may not always get subtle hints of, like, hey, you're disrupting the flow here. I think asking them what they need in order for things to move more smoothly, because sometimes they're afraid to ask, especially in a workplace. They don't want people to think they're incompetent because they're not. It's just their strengths are different and they show up in a different way. So for example, I do my best work in the morning, right? That's when I'm my most creative. It's when I can be the most focused. So I prefer to do certain activities in the morning, and then I prefer other ones in the afternoon. So asking them, like, when do you feel the most focused where you can get this done? But mostly just asking them what they may need. And if they don't know, then you can always kind of brainstorm, because some people don't know they have it, and it's not an easy thing to be like, I think you have ADHD, except for my friend who did it to me, but she was my friend, so.
Yeah.
But how would you say that to someone if you start to see some things that you think, maybe? How do you have that conversation?
If it's somebody that I know pretty well, sometimes the opportunities just present themselves.
Sure.
And I'll be like, I do that, kind of a thing. Sometimes you just sort of have to, like, if I notice there's a certain behavior, I may bring it up that, I was working with a client on this, and it'll be that behavior, just to sort of get the ball rolling with them to start thinking, maybe this is me.
So for us saying something like that, I was doing a podcast.
Yeah.
We were talking to this lady about ADHD, and she said da 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 da.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a symptom. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's a hard thing to bring up because there are a lot of people who don't think it's a real thing still. They think it's just an excuse for laziness. Or that people are. I spent most of my life thinking I was dumb. I was the only one of my friends in school that wasn't in the National Honor Society. I was behind. It took me 3 years to get through a 2-year college, and then I took a year off, and it took me another 3 years to get through the next 2 years. I got 2 years of college. But when I went to school for massage, because I was a clinical massage therapist at one point in time, I aced everything, including all the sciences, because I was really interested in it. And when we're really interested in something, we will know everything about it, and we can stay really focused on it. And but if we're not interested in it, it's really challenging for us to stay focused. So if you have coworkers that maybe have an interest that maybe you don't have, but they do, you could always help each other out in that department. Like there's ways to work with it. You just have to, communication I always find is the best way to handle it.
So you mentioned there's medication for it,
Mm-hmm.
and then obviously you give them coaching tips
Mm-hmm.
on how to manage some of the struggles, right?
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the timer, some of the things you talked about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not everybody wants to do medication. Not everybody can do medication. I myself am medicated, and it changed my world. I did not do it right away. I thought once I was diagnosed, I'm like, well, now that I know what this is, I could totally handle this on my own. I did not. And the same friend who convinced me to get assessed reached out a few months later, and she's like, you haven't started meds yet, have you? Like the first thing out of her mouth, I'm like, is it that obvious? She's like, yes. And so she's like, look, I think I know, but she goes, I think it's really going to help you. I don't think you're going to need that much. And so I finally talked to my doctor about it and started it, and it just changed everything for me. But not everybody has that as an option. And as they say, pills don't teach skills. So I was finding myself with motivation, and I still didn't have the executive functioning to pull anything off. So I had to still learn a lot of skills in order for myself to...
It's the combination.
Yeah,
that
the
worked
combination.
For you.
Yeah. For me, the best combination is medication with exercise. A lot of people, they say intense cardio can be helpful. The medication is just, it works very quickly if you're using a stimulant. If you're doing a non-stimulant, that is usually one that has to build up in your system over a period of time, usually, and it takes longer to find out if it's going to work for you or not. Some people have really good luck with that as well. But I also think that therapy, especially in the beginning, I didn't really get angry about my being blown off for so long until I started meds. And I went, oh my God, this is what everyone's been working with naturally? And I realized I had been living my entire life with my hands tied behind my back and didn't even realize it. And I got really angry, and so anyway, so I worked with my therapist on it. She was like, I was wondering when this was going to kick in, So I think the therapy is really helpful, and therapists like the coaching because that's the day-to-day stuff that they don't really do and they don't really want to do. They want to deal with the emotional components of it, and I help people with the day-to-day aspect of their life. So
There's two different baskets.
yeah, but they work really well together. So
Well, for our listeners, we are going to put all your contact information in our show notes.
Thank
So
you.
if somebody does want to reach out, I'm sure that you will be available to them.
Yep.
Absolutely. And we're so glad you joined us today. This has been so informative.
Yeah.
Whether you have ADHD or you know someone with ADHD or someone who needs to be diagnosed, like maybe Erin. But this is just what we do every week. So join us next Wednesday when we have another episode of Help Nobody Told Me.